I stood in that courtroom, just a few feet away from my own children, and neither of them would look at me. Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the table. Emily crossed her arms like I was a stranger. And across the room, my husband, Richard Sanders, sat there calm, almost satisfied, like he had already won. For months, he had been telling them lies about me, and they believed every word. But what he didn't know was this. Today, I wasn't going to argue. I was going to let them hear the truth. And once they did, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. If you've ever felt misunderstood or betrayed by someone you loved, I want you to stay with me on this journey. And before I go on, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always read every single one. If you had met us 10 years ago, you would have thought we were one of those couples people quietly envied. My name is Martha Sanders. I'm 58 years old, and for more than 3 decades, I was married to Richard Sanders. We built what looked like a good life. We had a modest but beautiful home in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. A white fence, a maple tree in the front yard that turned golden every fall. The kind of place where neighbors waved, where people remembered your birthday, where everything felt safe. Richard worked in financial management. He was organized, disciplined, respected. The kind of man people trusted with their money and their opinions. And me, I used to be a nurse. I loved my job. I loved helping people. But when Daniel was born, everything changed. I still remember holding him for the first time, thinking, this is my real life now. So I stepped back from my career. Not all at once, but slowly. Fewer shifts, then part-time. Then eventually, I stayed home completely. When Emily came along 4 years later, I didn't even question it anymore. I became the center of our home. Lunchboxes, school projects, doctor appointments, late-night fevers, birthday parties. Every little thing that keeps a family running, that was me. And I didn't resent it. Not then. Richard would come home every evening, loosen his tie, and sit at the table while I served dinner. The kids would run to him excited to tell him about their day. He'd smile, listen, nod, and sometimes he'd look at me and say, "You've done a great job with them, Martha." Back then, that was enough. Daniel grew into a responsible young man, quiet, thoughtful, just like his father. He studied engineering, got a good job, and always called on Sundays. Emily was different, more emotional, more expressive. She used to sit at the kitchen counter while I cooked, telling me everything, her friends, her fears, her dreams. We were close. So close that people used to say, "You two are like best friends." And I believed that. We had traditions, Sunday dinners, Christmas mornings with cinnamon rolls, summer barbecues in the backyard. From the outside, we were stable, predictable, safe. But when I look back now, I realize something I didn't see then. I was always the one holding everything together. If the house was quiet, it was because I kept it peaceful. If the kids were happy, it was because I made sure they felt loved. If Richard looked like a good husband and father, it was because I carried everything behind the scenes. I didn't think of it as a burden. I thought of it as love. But love, when it's one-sided for too long, becomes invisible. And invisible things are easy to erase. I think the first real moment I felt something shift wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a betrayal. It was something small. Daniel had come home for dinner. Emily was visiting too. I had cooked one of their favorite meals, roast chicken with mashed potatoes, just like when they were kids. We were all sitting at the table. I remember laughing about some old memory about Emily spilling juice on the carpet when she was 6. I said, "You cried for an hour because you thought I'd be mad." Emily smiled faintly, but before she could say anything, Richard leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, you were pretty hard on them sometimes, Martha." It was said so casually, like a harmless comment, but something about it didn't feel right. I laughed it off. Hard on them, I was the one who was always home with them. He shrugged. Yeah, but you had your moments. Daniel nodded slightly. Not fully agreeing, but not disagreeing either. And Emily, she just looked down at her plate. That moment stayed with me. It wasn't what he said. It was how easily it was accepted, like a small seed planted in the room. I told myself I was overthinking it. After all, every family has its little disagreements, right? But then it happened again. A week later, during a phone call with Emily. She mentioned something about her childhood, and then she said almost hesitantly, "You were kind of strict, Mom. I mean, Dad always said you worried too much." I froze. "Your dad said that, not in a bad way," she quickly added. "Just you know that you could be a little intense." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. But something inside me tightened. Because I had never heard Richard say those things to me. Only now, suddenly, I was hearing them through my children. That's when the doubt started. Quiet, subtle, but persistent. Had I really been too strict, too controlling, too much? I went back through memories, trying to see myself through their eyes. Every bedtime I enforced. Every rule I set. Every time I said no. Was that love? Or was that something else? And why was Richard the one shaping how they remembered it? I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because, at that point, I still believed this was just misunderstanding. A phase. A shift. Something that would pass. I had no idea that this was only the beginning, and that the man I had trusted for over 30 years was quietly rewriting my entire story, one conversation at a time. Looking back now, I can pinpoint exactly when things stopped feeling like small misunderstandings and started feeling like something else entirely. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, quiet, almost careful. After that dinner conversation, Richard didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, he started doing something more subtle. He began correcting me. At first, it sounded harmless. One afternoon, Emily and I were talking about a vacation we took years ago. Florida, I think. I mentioned how she had gotten sick on the second day. Richard, who was sitting in his armchair, barely looking up from his phone, said, "No, that was the third day." I frowned. "I'm pretty sure it was the second." He shook his head. "No, Martha. You always mix things like that up." It was the third day. Emily hesitated. Then she said, "Yeah, I think Dad's right." It wasn't the disagreement that bothered me. It was how quickly my version of reality was dismissed, and how easily his replaced it. I let it go, but it didn't stop there. Little things kept happening. Conversations where I remembered something clearly, and Richard would calmly say I was wrong. Moments where I tried to explain myself, and he would interrupt with, "That's not what happened." Or worse, "You're exaggerating again." At first, I thought maybe I was misremembering things. After all, I was getting older. Memory isn't perfect. But then something started to feel off. Because it wasn't just with me. It was always in front of the kids. Always when Daniel or Emily were around. One night during dinner, Daniel mentioned a time when he got into trouble in high school. I smiled and said, "Oh, you mean when you skipped class and I grounded you for a week?" Richard laughed softly. "No, Martha. That's not how it happened. You blew it way out of proportion. He was barely late to one class." Daniel looked uncomfortable. "I mean, yeah, it wasn't that serious." I stared at him. "You skipped class, Daniel." "The school called me." He avoided my eyes. "Mom, you used to panic about stuff like that." Panic. That word hit me harder than anything else, because that wasn't how I remembered myself. I was strict, yes. Careful, maybe. But I wasn't irrational. Was I? That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations in my head, trying to separate what was real from what was being said, trying to figure out if I had changed or if something else had. And then a few days later, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I overheard Richard on the phone. He was in his office, the door slightly open. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard my name. "She's always been like that," he was saying. "Overreacts. Makes things bigger than they are." I froze. "The kids are starting to see it now," he continued. "They didn't when they were younger, but now, yeah, they get it." My chest tightened. I stood there completely still, as if moving would somehow make it worse. "She means well," he added, almost casually. "But living with it for 30 years, you learn to just manage it. Manage it. Like I was a problem. Like I was something to tolerate." I stepped away before he could see me. I didn't confront him. I didn't even tell him I had heard. But something inside me shifted in that moment, because this wasn't just about small disagreements anymore. This wasn't just about different memories. Richard was telling a story about me, and he was telling it to other people. Not just strangers, but our children. And slowly, carefully, they were starting to believe it. After that, I began to pay closer attention. I noticed how he framed things. If I disagreed with him, he'd sigh and say, "Here we go again." If I raised my voice even slightly, he'd look at the kids and say, "See what I deal with." If I tried to explain myself, he'd interrupt with, "Martha, you're getting emotional." It didn't matter what I said after that. Once I was labeled emotional, everything I said lost credibility. And the worst part? It worked. I watched Daniel start to pull away. He stopped calling as often. When he did, the conversations felt distant, polite, careful, like he was talking to someone unpredictable. Emily was harder to read. She still called, still visited, but something had changed. She didn't confide in me the same way anymore. And when I tried to give advice, she'd sometimes say things like, "Mom, you don't have to worry so much," or "It's not that serious," the same phrases Richard used. That's when I realized it wasn't just happening in front of me, it was happening when I wasn't there. He was shaping how they saw me, piece by piece, conversation by conversa, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. And I didn't even know how long it had been going on. One evening, I finally tried to talk to him. We were alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet. I said as calmly as I could, "Richard, I feel like you've been Tien." And I didn't even know how long it had been going on. One evening, I finally tried to talk to him. We were alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet. I said as calmly as I could, "Richard, I feel like you've been misrepresenting me to the kids." He looked at me like I had just said something absurd. "Misrepresenting you?" "Yes," I said. "You make it sound like I'm unstable, like I overreact to everything." He let out a small, almost amused laugh. "Martha, I don't have to make you sound that way." The words landed like a slap. "I'm asking you to stop," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. He shrugged. "Maybe if you didn't act like that, there wouldn't be anything to say." There it was, a perfect circle. Anything I said to defend myself only proved his point. If I stayed calm, I was cold. If I showed emotion, I was unstable. If I spoke up, I was overreacting. If I stayed quiet, I was withdrawing. There was no way to win. And somehow, I hadn't even realized I was in a game. That night, I sat alone in the living room, long after Richard had gone to bed. The house felt different, not unsafe, but unfamiliar, like I was living inside a version of my life that someone else had rewritten. And the most painful part wasn't Richard. It was the thought that my own children were starting to see me through his eyes. That's when the fear really set in, because I could handle being misunderstood by a husband, but losing my children, that was something I wasn't sure I could survive. And deep down, I had a feeling it was already happening. The hardest part wasn't realizing that Richard was turning my children against me. It was realizing I had no proof. Everything he did was subtle, carefully worded, calm, reasonable. If I tried to explain it out loud, it sounded like I was the one overreacting. That's what made it so dangerous. So instead of confronting him again, I did something different. I started watching. Really watching. I paid attention to the timing of his comments, the way he chose his words, the small looks he gave the kids when I spoke. And the more I paid attention, the more I saw it. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel came over for lunch. Emily joined us too. I had spent the morning cooking old habits die hard. We sat at the table, and for a moment it almost felt normal. Then Emily mentioned she was thinking about changing jobs. "I just don't feel appreciated," she said. "Like no matter what I do, it's never enough." I leaned forward instinctively. "Have you talked to your manager about it?" I asked gently. "Sometimes communication can—" Before I could finish, Richard cut in. "Emily doesn't need a lecture, Martha." The word lecture stung. "I wasn't lecturing," I said. He gave a small, knowing smile. "See, this is what I mean. You don't even realize when you're doing it." Emily shifted in her seat. "I just wanted to vent," she said quietly. I sat back. "I'm sorry," I murmured. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way." Richard reached over and patted Emily's hand. "You're fine. You don't have to explain yourself." That moment told me everything. He wasn't just disagreeing with me. He was positioning himself as the safe one, the understanding one. And me, I was becoming the problem. After they left, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty plates. I replayed the conversation over and over. Had I really sounded like I was lecturing? Or had he framed it that way so it would feel that way? That night, I made a decision. If I couldn't rely on memory, I would rely on facts. The next day, I took out an old notebook. Nothing fancy, just something simple. And I started writing. Every conversation, every comment, every moment that felt off. At first, it felt ridiculous, like I was overreacting. But then something strange happened. Patterns started to appear. Richard almost never contradicted me when we were alone, only when the kids were present. He rarely raised his voice. Instead, he used tone, calm, slightly amused, just enough to make me sound emotional by comparison. He didn't insult me directly. He implied things. "You're getting worked up again. You always take things too far." That's not how it happened. Individually, each comment was small, but together, they built a narrative. And that narrative was slowly replacing who I actually was. A week later, I had my first real confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. Emily called me. Her voice sounded distant. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. She hesitated. "Were you ever unhappy in your marriage?" The question caught me off guard. "Unhappy," I repeated. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said. "Dad he said you've always been kind of dissatisfied, like nothing was ever enough for you." I felt my chest tighten. "I've been married to your father for over 30 years, Emily. I said carefully. Of course, there were hard moments. But I was committed to this family. She didn't respond right away. Then she said, "He said you used to threaten to leave sometimes." I froze. That's not true. Well, he seemed pretty sure. Of course he did, because he said it calmly, confidently, like it was fact. I never threatened to leave, I said firmly. Not once. There was a long silence. I don't know what to believe, Emily whispered. That broke something inside me, because it wasn't anger I heard in her voice. It was confusion, doubt, the kind of doubt that slowly eats away at trust. After we hung up, I sat there staring at my phone. My own daughter didn't know what to believe about me, and that's when the fear turned into something else. Not panic, not sadness, something sharper, clarity. Because for the first time I understood what Richard was doing. This wasn't random. This wasn't careless. This was deliberate. He wasn't trying to destroy me all at once. He was erasing me slowly, replacing me with a version of myself that was easier to dismiss, easier to turn away from. And once that version became real in the eyes of our children, I would lose them completely. That night, I went back to my notebook. But this time, I didn't just write what happened. I wrote how it made me feel. The confusion, the doubt, the moments where I questioned my own memory. Because I realized something important. This wasn't just about what he said. It was about how it made me question myself. And if I didn't hold on to the truth, no one else would. Days turned into weeks, and my notebook filled up, page after page. Patterns, conversations, small moments that added up to something undeniable. But I still didn't know what to do with it, because who could I show it to?
Well, who would believe me?
Then one evening, something happened that changed everything. I came home earlier than usual. Richard was in the living room talking to Daniel on speakerphone. He didn't hear me come in.
You just have to be careful around her,
he was saying.
She doesn't handle criticism well.
I stood frozen in the doorway. Daniel's voice came through the phone.
Yeah.
I've noticed that. My heart dropped.
I'm not saying she's a bad person, Richard continued, but she has a tendency to twist things. You've seen it.
There was a pause. Then Daniel said something that shattered me. Honestly, Dad, sometimes I feel like I don't even know who she really is. I had to put my hand against the wall to steady myself, because in that moment, I realized I was losing him. Not because of something I had done, but because of something he had been told. And suddenly, everything became clear. This wasn't just a family issue. This was a war for the truth. And if I didn't fight for it, I would lose everything. After that phone call, something inside me hardened. Not in a cold way, but in a way that finally understood the stakes. This wasn't about being liked anymore. This wasn't about keeping peace. This was about truth. And I realized something very clearly. If I didn't start protecting my version of reality, there would be nothing left of it. So I changed my approach. I stopped reacting. That was the first step. Because I noticed something important, Richard needed me to react. Every time I raised my voice even slightly, it gave him exactly what he wanted. Proof. Evidence. A moment he could later describe as, "See, this is what I deal with." So I became quiet. Not weak, not defeated, just controlled. The next time it happened, I was ready. We were all in the living room. Daniel had come by unexpectedly, and Emily joined on a video call. We were talking about holiday plans. I suggested we host Thanksgiving at our house like we always did. Richard leaned back, crossing his arms. That might be a lot for you, Martha. I kept my voice steady. I've done it for years.
He smiled faintly. Yeah, but it usually turns into a whole situation. I could feel Daniel watching me, waiting, expecting something. The old me would have jumped in, defended myself, listed every year I had successfully hosted every detail I handled. But this time I just said, "What do you mean by that? Simple? Calm. Direct." Richard blinked slightly like he hadn't expected the question. Well, you get stressed. You tend to snap at people. I nodded slowly. Can you give me an example? There was a pause, a long one. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. It's not about one specific thing, he said finally. It's a pattern. I didn't argue. I just looked at him, and for the first time, I saw something flicker across his face. Not confidence, not control. Something closer to uncertainty. That moment stayed with me, because it told me something critical. His power didn't come from facts. It came from how things felt, and feelings could be influenced, framed, twisted. But facts were different. That's when I decided my notebook wasn't enough. I needed something stronger. Something that couldn't be dismissed as just my perspective. A few days later, I bought a small voice recorder. Nothing fancy, just something simple I could carry in my purse. At first, I hesitated. It felt wrong, like I was crossing a line. But then I remembered Daniel's voice on that phone call. Sometimes I feel like I don't even know who she really is. And I knew the line had already been crossed. I just hadn't drawn it. The first time I used the recorder, my hands were shaking. It was a normal evening. Dinner. Conversation. And right on cue, it happened. I mentioned something about Emily's childhood, how she used to get anxious before school presentations. Richard chuckled softly. You mean how you used to make her anxious? There it was. That subtle shift. That quiet rewrite. I kept my voice calm. I supported her through that. He shrugged. You hovered. Big difference. Emily laughed awkwardly. Dad. But she didn't disagree. I let the conversation move on. But inside, I felt something click. Because now, for the first time, I had it. Not just memory. Not just feeling. Proof. That night, I sat in my bedroom listening to the recording, hearing his tone, his words, the way he framed everything, and something became undeniable. He wasn't confused. He wasn't misremembering. He was intentional. Every word carefully chosen. Every comment placed at just the right moment. And once I saw it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. Over the next few weeks, I kept recording, not constantly, just enough. Conversations with the kids, moments where he corrected me, times when he subtly undermined me. And as I listened back to them, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. He never attacked me directly. He suggested things, implanted ideas, allowed others to draw their own conclusions, which made it even more powerful, because it didn't feel like manipulation. It felt like realization. That's how he was winning. But now, I was starting to understand the game. And once you understand the game, you can change how you play. One evening, I decided to test something. Emily came over alone. No Richard, no Daniel, just the two of us. We sat in the kitchen like we used to. For a moment, it felt almost normal. Then I said gently, "Do you think I was a good mother?" She looked surprised. "Of course you were. Then why do you sound unsure sometimes?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know. It's just Dad says things sometimes that make me wonder." There it was. Not certainty, not belief, just influence. "What kind of things?" I asked softly. She looked down at her hands. "That you were hard to live with, that you overreacted a lot, that you made things bigger than they needed to be." I nodded slowly. And do you remember that? She frowned. I don't know. Not really, but it makes sense when he says it. That sentence told me everything. It makes sense when he says it. Not because it's true, but because it's been repeated. Calmly, consistently, confidently. Calmly, consistently, confidently. I ached across the table and took her hand. Emily, I need you to trust something. She looked up at me. What? That your memories matter, not just what someone else tells you. Ached across the table and took her hand. Emily, I need you to trust something. She looked up at me. What? That your memories matter, not just what someone else tells you. She didn't respond right away, but I saw something in her eyes. Not certainty, but doubt. Not about me, about him. And for the first time in weeks, that gave me hope. Because doubt works both ways. If it could be used against me, it could also be used to uncover the truth. That night, I listened to my recordings again. But this time, I didn't feel helpless. I felt prepared. Because I knew something now that I didn't know before. Richard had been building his version of the story slowly, carefully, over time. But I was about to do something he didn't expect. I was going to bring everything into the light. And once it was all out in the open, there would be no more quiet manipulation, no more subtle rewrites, no more control. Just the truth. And the truth was something he could no longer manage. Once I decided to bring everything into the light, I knew I couldn't rush it. Because timing mattered. If I exposed Richard too early, without enough proof, it would backfire. He would twist it, make me look paranoid, unstable. Exactly the image he had been building. So I waited. And while I waited, I collected. More recordings, more notes, more moments where his version of reality quietly replaced mine. But something else started happening too. He was becoming bolder. It was subtle at first. A comment here, a correction there. But then one evening, it crossed a line I couldn't ignore. We were at Daniel's house. His wife Lauren had just set dinner on the table. It was one of those family nights that used to feel warm. Now it felt like a performance. Everyone was careful, measured, like we were all playing roles we didn't fully understand. At one point, Lauren mentioned how organized I used to be when the kids were younger. I still don't know how you managed everything, she said with a smile. Work, school, activities, all of it. I smiled politely. It wasn't perfect, but we made it work. Before I could say anything else, Richard chuckled. Well, let's not rewrite history. The room went quiet. Lauren blinked. What do you mean? Richard leaned back in his chair, casual. Your mother had help, he said, nodding toward me. A lot of it. I frowned slightly. I worked full-time, Richard. We both did. He waved his hand dismissively. Sure, but let's be honest. You leaned on others more than you remember. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, but I didn't react. Not the way he expected. Instead, I said calmly, Who did I lean on? He paused, just for a second. Then he smiled. You know, neighbors, friends. Your sister. My sister lived 3 states away, I said quietly. There was another pause, a longer one this time, and I saw it again. That flicker, that tiny crack in his confidence. But then Daniel stepped in. Dad's just saying you didn't do it alone, he said. Nobody does. And just like that, the moment shifted. Richard didn't need to prove anything. The seed had already been planted. I sat there looking at my son, realizing something painful. He wasn't defending me. But he wasn't attacking me either. He was adjusting. adapting to the version of me he had been given. And that hurt more than anything Richard could say. That night, I listened to the recording again. And for the first time, I noticed something new. It wasn't just what Richard said. It was how others responded. They filled in the gaps. They softened his statements. They made his version feel reasonable. Which meant I wasn't just up against him. I was up against perception. And perception spreads. That realization changed everything. Because it meant I couldn't just prove he was wrong. I had to show how he was doing it, not just the outcome, the method, the pattern, the manipulation. And that's when I made the next decision. I needed a witness, someone outside the family, someone who wasn't already influenced. At first, I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't want to involve friends. It felt too personal, too messy. Then I thought of someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Karen Whitmore, an old colleague, now a family therapist. We had worked together briefly before she changed careers. She was sharp, observant, the kind of person who noticed what others missed. I hesitated before calling her, but when she answered, her voice was just as steady as I remembered. Martha. It's been a long time. It has, I said softly. I need your help. We met 2 days later. A quiet office, neutral space. No history. No bias. Exactly what I needed. I didn't start with accusations. I didn't say my husband is manipulating my children. Instead, I told her everything. The conversations, the patterns, the recordings. She listened without interrupting, without reacting, just listening. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. This isn't random. I nodded slowly. I know. She leaned forward slightly. What you're describing is a form of psychological manipulation. It's subtle, but it's consistent. Hearing it out loud from someone else made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. So I'm not imagining it, I said quietly. No, she said firmly. You're not. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. But proving it will be difficult, she continued, because it's not overt, it's layered. Context matters. I have recordings, I said. She nodded. That helps. But more importantly, you have patterns. She paused, then added, and patterns are harder to dismiss. I felt something shift inside me. Hope. Not the fragile kind, the grounded kind, the kind built on evidence. What should I do? I asked. Karen studied me for a moment. Are you planning to confront him? I shook my head. No, not yet. Good, she said, because confrontation without control will only reinforce his narrative. That made sense. Too much sense. Then what I asked, she leaned back slightly. You prepare. For what? For a moment where the truth can't be interrupted, can't be reframed, can't be dismissed. I frowned. What kind of moment is that? She held my gaze, a formal one, and suddenly, it clicked. Not a conversation, not an argument, something bigger, something structured, something where evidence mattered more than tone, more than perception, more than manipulation. And in that moment, I understood where all of this was leading. Not just conflict, not just exposure, but something irreversible, something that would force everything into the open. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that, because I wasn't walking into it empty-handed anymore. I was walking in with the truth. And the truth was finally on my side. Once Karen said it out loud, a formal moment, everything started falling into place. Not emotionally, strategically. Because for the first time, I wasn't thinking like a wife trying to fix a marriage. I was thinking like someone preparing to present a case. And that shift changed everything. I went home that night and sat at the kitchen table for hours. Not crying, not spiraling, organizing. I took out my notebook, my recordings, every detail I had collected, and I started building something. A timeline, not just of events, but of patterns. When Richard began correcting me more frequently, when the kids started repeating his language, when my own confidence began to slip. It wasn't random, it was progressive, layer by layer, like he had been slowly rewriting the foundation of our family, and the more I mapped it out, the clearer it became. There was intention behind it, consistency, control. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not because I was ready to file anything, but because I needed to understand my options. Her name was Lisa Grant. Sharp, direct, no nonsense, exactly what I needed. We met that afternoon. I brought everything, my notes, my recordings, even my timeline. She went through it carefully, not rushing, not reacting emotionally, just analyzing. After nearly an hour, she set everything down. "This is unusual," she said. I felt my chest tighten. "Unusual how?" She looked at me. "Most cases involve clear conflict, arguments, incidents. This," she gestured to my notes, "is more subtle." "I know," I said quietly. "But subtle doesn't mean harmless," she added. That sentence stayed with me, because for weeks I had been questioning whether I was overreacting, whether this was just miscommunication. But hearing her say that subtle doesn't mean harmless felt like validation. "What can I do?" I asked. Lisa leaned back in her chair. "That depends on what you want." I didn't hesitate. "I want the truth to be seen." She nodded slowly. "Then you need a setting where evidence matters, where narratives are challenged, where both sides are required to present facts." My stomach tightened slightly. "You mean court?" "I do," she said. The word hung in the air. Heavy, final, terrifying, but also strangely right. Because what I had been living in wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a distortion. And distortions don't fix themselves. They have to be exposed. If I go down that road, I started what happens to my children? Lisa didn't soften her answer. They may not understand at first answer. They may not understand at first tea. That hurt. They may even side against you, she continued. That hurt more. But if you have the evidence you say you do, she paused. Then eventually, the truth has a way of correcting itself. That hurt. They may even side against you, she continued. That hurt more. But if you have the evidence you say you do, she paused. Then eventually the truth has a way of correcting itself. Eventually. I held on to that word because it meant this wouldn't be immediate. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be real. And I was done living in something that wasn't. That night, I didn't tell Richard anything. I didn't confront him. I didn't change my behavior. I stayed consistent because I knew something now that he didn't. The end of this story was no longer his to control. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Lisa. We organized everything, structured it, prepared it in a way that couldn't be dismissed as emotional exaggeration. Every recording had context. Every note had a timeline. Every pattern had repetition. And the more we built it, the stronger it became. But something else started happening too. Richard noticed. Not the evidence, but the shift in me. "You've been quiet lately," he said one evening. I was washing dishes. I'm just tired, I replied calmly. He watched me for a moment. You used to have more energy. I didn't turn around. Maybe I've been using it in the wrong places. There was a pause. Then he laughed lightly. That sounds like something a therapist would say. I didn't respond, but inside, I felt something steady. Because for once, he wasn't reading me correctly, and that meant he was losing his grip. A few days later, Emily called me. Out of nowhere. Her voice sounded hesitant. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. She hesitated. Do you think Dad exaggerates things? The question caught me off guard. Not because of what she asked, but because of what it meant. The doubt was growing. Yes, I said gently. Sometimes he does. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about what you said about trusting my own memories. My heart tightened, and I don't remember things the way he describes them, she admitted. That was it. The shift. Small, fragile, but real. You don't have to choose sides, Emily, I said softly. You just have to be honest with yourself. I'm trying, she whispered. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. Not crying, not celebrating, just processing. Because this wasn't about winning. Because this wasn't about winning. IT was about clarity, and clarity takes time. But it comes. Slowly, quietly. I continued preparing with Lisa, filing paperwork, setting dates, taking steps that made everything feel Moret was about clarity. And clarity takes time. But it comes. Slowly. Quietly. I continued preparing with Lisa, filing paperwork, setting dates, taking steps that made everything feel more official, more real. Until one afternoon it happened. I walked into the house and found a letter on the kitchen counter. Addressed to me, from Richard. I opened it slowly, my hands steady, my heart not. Inside were divorce papers. But that wasn't the part that stopped me. It was the attached statement, a written declaration, describing me as emotionally unstable, controlling, prone to outbursts, unreliable as a mother. I read it once, then again, and then I sat down. Because suddenly, everything became clear. This wasn't just manipulation. This was strategy. He wasn't just shaping their perception. He was preparing a case, and if I hadn't started collecting evidence when I did, he would have already won. I looked at the papers in my hands, at the version of me he had put into words, and for the first time I didn't feel defensive. I didn't feel panicked. I felt ready, because unlike him, I didn't need to create a story. I already had the truth, and soon everyone else would hear it too. The day I was officially served, I didn't cry. I expected to. I thought I would break down the moment it became real. But instead, I felt something else. Clarity. Because everything that had been hidden, implied, whispered, was now written in black and white. Richard wasn't just manipulating behind closed doors anymore. He had committed to a version of me. And now, he had to defend it. I called Lisa immediately. I've been served, I said. Her response was calm. Good. I blinked. Good? Yes, she said, because now the process starts. And once it starts, it follows rules. Rules. That was the difference. At home, Richard controlled the narrative. But in court, he wouldn't be the only one speaking. Bring everything, Lisa said. We're going to respond properly. That same afternoon, I sat across from her again. The papers spread out between us. She walked me through every line, every accusation, every claim. "He's painting a consistent picture," she said. "Emotionally unstable, unreliable, disconnected from reality." I nodded slowly. "I've seen that picture before," I said quietly. "In your home," she replied. "Exactly. This is just the formal version of what he's been doing all along." Lisa leaned forward. "Which means we're not just responding to a legal claim." She tapped my folder of evidence. "We're exposing a pattern." That word again. Pattern. It had become the backbone of everything. "Do you think the kids will testify?" I asked. Lisa didn't hesitate. "If he's confident, he'll want them involved." My stomach dropped. "And if they believe him?" She met my eyes. "Then we let them speak." That scared me, more than anything else so far, because I wasn't afraid of Richard's lies anymore. I was afraid of my children repeating them. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt different now. Not broken, not tense, just empty, like something had already ended even though it hadn't been finalized. I looked around at the photos on the wall. Birthdays, graduations, family vacations, moments that felt real. And I asked myself something I hadn't dared to before. When did it start to change? Not just Richard, but everything. And the answer came quietly. Not all at once, but in pieces. The small corrections, the subtle doubts, the way I stopped trusting my own memory, the way I started questioning my own reactions. It hadn't happened overnight. It had happened slowly, so slowly. I didn't see it. Until now. The next few days moved fast. Paperwork, deadlines, legal steps that made everything feel mechanical. But beneath it all, there was tension building, because Richard wasn't staying silent. He started calling the kids more often, long conversations behind closed doors, messages I wasn't included in. I didn't ask, I didn't interfere, because this time, I was playing the long game. Then one afternoon, Daniel showed up at my door, unannounced. I opened it, surprised. "Daniel?" He stepped inside without waiting. We stood there for a moment, the air between us heavy. "I got the papers," he said. I nodded. "I figured you would." He ran a hand through his hair. "He says you're trying to take everything from him." There it was, straight to the point. "I'm not," I said, calmly. "He says you've been unstable for years." I held his gaze. "Do you believe that?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he admitted. That hurt, but it was honest, and I could work with honesty. "Then don't believe either of us," I said gently. "Just listen, watch, pay attention to what's real." He frowned slightly. "That's not how this works, Mom." "It is," I said. "It's exactly how this works." He looked frustrated. "Telling me to figure it out myself isn't helping." "I'm not asking you to pick a side," I said. "I'm asking you to trust your own experience." He went quiet, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, confused, caught in something bigger than him. "I just want things to make sense," he said quietly. "So do I replied. He stayed for a little while longer. We didn't argue. We didn't resolve anything. But something shifted. Not dramatically. Not completely. But enough. Enough to know he wasn't fully gone. After he left, I sat back down at the table. And I added another note to my timeline. Children beginning to question. It felt strange. Documenting my own life like evidence. But that's what it had become. a case, and I was both the subject and the witness. A few days later, Lisa called me. "We have a preliminary hearing scheduled." My heart skipped. "When?" 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That was all.
2 weeks until everything moved from private to public, from whispered to recorded, from controlled to challenged. "Are you ready?" she asked. I looked down at my notes, at the recordings, at everything I had built. "No," I said honestly. Then I paused. "But I will be, because readiness wasn't about feeling prepared. It was about choosing not to run. And I wasn't running anymore. Not from him, not from the truth, not from the moment that was coming. Because for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I stood. And soon, so would everyone else. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived faster than I expected. I woke up before my alarm, not because I was anxious, but because my body already knew. Today, things would shift. Not emotionally, not privately, but publicly. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, not fixing my hair, not adjusting my clothes, just looking at myself, trying to recognize the woman staring back. Because a few months ago, I would have seen someone uncertain, someone second-guessing every thought. Now I saw someone different, still tired, still hurt, but grounded. And that mattered more than anything. When I arrived at the courthouse, everything felt quiet. Not peaceful, controlled. Like every emotion had to stay within invisible boundaries. Lisa met me at the entrance. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. Yes. She studied me for a second, then gave a small approving nod. "Good. Stay that way." Inside the hallway was already filling with people. Lawyers, families, strangers walking into their own battles. And for a moment, I realized something important. I wasn't alone in this, not in the situation itself, but in the experience. There were other people here, standing at the edge of something difficult, something life-changing, and somehow, that made it easier to breathe. Then I saw him, Richard, standing across the hall, calm, composed, like this was just another situation he could control. Our eyes met, and for a brief second, I saw it. Confidence, not arrogance, certainty. He believed his version of reality would hold, that it would carry him through this, and maybe a few weeks ago, it would have, but not anymore. He walked toward me slowly. Lisa stepped slightly in front of me, but I shook my head. "It's okay," I whispered. Richard stopped a few feet away. "You didn't have to take it this far," he said. His voice was soft, measured, almost concerned. Anyone watching would think he was the reasonable one, the calm one, the victim. "I didn't," I replied. "You did." He smiled faintly. "That's not how it looks." I held his gaze. "That's because you've been controlling how it looks." There was a pause. A small one, but enough. Enough for me to see it again. That flicker. That tiny shift when something doesn't go as expected. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I stopped making them." Lisa touched my arm gently. "It's time." We walked into the courtroom together, and everything changed. The space felt different from anything else. Formal, structured.
No room for interpretation. No space for subtle manipulation. Here words mattered. Evidence mattered. And most importantly, interruptions weren't allowed. We took our seats. I sat beside Lisa. Richard sat across the room with his lawyer. I glanced around once. And then I saw them. Daniel, Emily, sitting behind Richard. My chest tightened. They didn't look at me. Not at first. But I didn't look away either. Because this was the moment everything had been building toward. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. And just like that, it began. Richard's lawyer spoke first. Confident, smooth, controlled. He painted a picture. A familiar one. Martha Sanders has demonstrated a pattern of emotional instability. There it was. The same language, the same narrative, now dressed in legal terms. He continued. Creating an unpredictable and harmful environment for her family, I didn't react. I didn't flinch. Because I had heard it all before. The only difference now was that it wasn't the only version being told. When it was our turn, Lisa stood. Her voice was calm, clear, precise. We intend to demonstrate that what appears to be instability is actually the result of sustained psychological manipulation. The room shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Because that wasn't the narrative they expected, and I saw it. Daniel looked up, just slightly. Emily's expression changed. Confusion, not rejection, not disbelief. Confusion. And that was all I needed. Lisa continued. We will present evidence showing a consistent pattern of distortion, suggestion, and influence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She just stated facts. And in that room, facts carried weight. Then something unexpected happened. Richard leaned over to his lawyer, whispered something, urgent. I couldn't hear it, but I saw the reaction. His lawyer hesitated. Just for a second, then adjusted his papers. That flicker again, only this time it wasn't small. It was visible. Because for the first time, Richard wasn't controlling the pace. The judge asked a few questions, clarifications, nothing dramatic, but every answer mattered. Every detail was recorded. And suddenly, there was no room for reinterpretation. No room for that's not what I meant, because everything said here stayed. Then the judge looked directly at me. Mrs. Sanders, she said, do you intend to present evidence supporting these claims? My heart beat faster, but my voice didn't shake. Yes, Your Honor. And are you prepared to do so in full proceedings? I glanced at Lisa. She gave a small nod. I looked back at the judge. Yes. The word felt heavier than anything I had said so far, because it meant commitment. No turning back. No quiet resolution. No pretending this could go away. This was happening, and I was choosing it. The hearing didn't last long, not really, but when it ended, everything felt different, not resolved, not finished, but set. The next stage was inevitable now. As people began to leave, I stayed seated for a moment, just breathing, taking it in. Then I felt it, a presence beside me. I turned. It was Emily. She looked uncertain, like she didn't know if she should be there. Mom, she said softly. I waited. I didn't know. She admitted. That sentence meant everything. You weren't supposed to, I said gently. She swallowed. Is it all true? I held her gaze. Every word. She nodded slowly, not fully understanding, not fully convinced, but no longer certain of the other version. And that was enough. for now, because truth doesn't always win in one moment. Sometimes it just needs to be heard. And today, for the first time, it was. After the preliminary hearing, something subtle but irreversible changed. Not in the court, not in the case, in my children. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't dramatic, but it was there.
Like a crack in glass that hadn't shattered yet but would. A few days later, Emily called me. Not a text, not a short message, a call. That alone told me everything. "Hi," she said, her voice hesitant. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, keeping my tone steady. There was a pause. Then she exhaled softly. "I've been thinking." I didn't interrupt, because thinking meant questioning, and questioning meant the truth was starting to move. "I didn't understand what your lawyer said," she admitted, "about manipulation." I leaned back in my chair. "That's okay," I said gently. "It's not something people usually understand right away." Another pause. Then, did Dad really do that? There it was. The question that mattered. Not, is it true? But did he do it? That shift was everything. "I'm not going to tell you what to believe," I said carefully, "but I will tell you this." I took a breath. If something feels confusing, if you feel like your memories don't line up with what you're being told, I let the silence sit for a second. "That's not your fault." She didn't respond immediately, but I could hear it. The quiet, the processing. "That happens to me sometimes," she whispered. My chest tightened. "I know," I said softly. We talked for a while after that, not about the case, not about Richard directly, just about feelings, moments, little inconsistencies she had started noticing. Nothing explosive, nothing conclusive, but enough. Enough to plant doubt. And doubt was the beginning of truth. A few days later, Daniel came back. This time, he didn't knock. He just walked in, like he used to. That alone made my heart ache. He stood in the kitchen, looking around like he was seeing it differently. "You kept everything the same," he said. I shrugged lightly. "It's still my home." He nodded slowly, then turned to me. "Dad says you're building a case against him." "I am," I said calmly. He didn't expect that answer. I saw it immediately. "You're not even denying it?" he asked. "No." "Why? Because it's the truth." He stared at me, confused, frustrated. "Mom, that sounds bad." "It sounds honest," I corrected. He paced a little, running his hands through his hair. "I don't understand why you do this to us." That hit harder than anything. Not to him, to us. I took a step closer. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said quietly. "I'm doing something for myself." "That's selfish." "Maybe," I admitted. "But sometimes protecting yourself is the only way to survive." He stopped pacing, looked at me again. "You really think Dad's been manipulating us?" I didn't answer immediately, because this moment mattered. Every word mattered. "I think I said slowly that your father has been very careful about what he says and how he says it." Daniel frowned. "That's not the same thing." "No," I agreed. "It's not." He waited, and then I said it, but it leads to the same result. Silence filled the room. Heavy, uncomfortable, real. "I don't want to believe that," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "Neither did I. For years. After he left, I sat down again. But this time, I didn't reach for my notes. I didn't write anything down. Because for the first time, I didn't need to. The shift was happening in real time, and I could feel it. But Richard could too, and he didn't like it. The next move came quickly, faster than I expected. Lisa called me early one morning. Richard's legal team submitted something new, she said. My stomach dropped. What is it? A motion to request psychological evaluation? I froze. For me, I asked. Yes, of course. Of course he would go there. Make it official. Make it clinical. Turn doubt into diagnosis. I closed my eyes for a moment. Do we fight it? I asked. Lisa paused. Then, no. I opened my eyes. No. We accept it, she said firmly. That surprised me. Why would we do that? Because it's a risk for him too, she explained. If you pass it cleanly, do we fight it? I asked. Lisa paused. Then, no. I opened my eyes. No, we accept it, she said firmly. That surprised me. Why would we do that? Because it's a risk for him too, she explained. If you pass it cleanly, she let the sentence hang. It destroys his narrative. I exhaled slowly. She was right. If I refused, it would look like I had something to hide. But if I agreed, and nothing was found, everything he built would start collapsing. Okay, I said. I'll do it. The evaluation was scheduled within days. A quiet office, neutral environment, a licensed professional who didn't know either of us. No bias, no history, just questions, observations, and truth. The session lasted hours. Not just simple questions, deep ones. About my past, my marriage, my emotions, my reactions. At one point, the evaluator asked me something unexpected. Have you ever felt like you were losing your sense of reality? I didn't hesitate. Yes, and why do you think that is? I looked down for a moment, then answered honestly. Because someone I trusted kept telling me my reality was wrong. She nodded. Not surprised, not judgmental, just understanding. When it was over, I felt exhausted, but not afraid, because I knew what they would find. Nothing. No instability, no disorder. Just a woman who had been pushed to doubt herself and had finally stopped. A week later, the results came in. Lisa called me again. This time, her voice carried something different. Relief. It's clean, she said. I closed my eyes. Let that sink in. Completely. Completely. I let out a breath I didn't realize as I had been holding. He just lost a major piece of his argument, she added. Yes, he did, but more importantly, my children were going to see it. Not from me, not from emotions, from an independent source, from someone with no reason to lie. And that was the beginning of the end for his version of the story, because manipulation can survive doubt. It can survive confusion, but it cannot survive proof. And now, we had it. The official court date was set. 2 weeks. That was all we had. 2 weeks before everything would be laid out in the open. 2 weeks before my children would hear the full truth. Not filtered, not softened, not rewritten, raw and irreversible. I thought I would feel panic, fear, doubt. But instead, I felt clarity. Not comfort, not peace, just clarity. Because for the first time, there was nothing left to figure out. Only something left to prove. Lisa and I met almost every day. Preparing, reviewing, organizing everything down to the smallest detail.
Court isn't about what's true, she reminded me. It's about what you can demonstrate. So we built it, carefully. Every conversation I had documented, every contradiction in Richard's statements, every pattern, every shift in how my children spoke to me over time. Laid out, structured, impossible to ignore when seen all together. One afternoon, Lisa slid a folder across the table. "This," she said, "is where things change." I opened it and immediately felt my chest tighten. It was transcripts, recorded conversations, not mine, Richard's, with the kids. I looked up at her. "How did you?" "They were submitted as part of his own evidence," she said calmly. That surprised me. Why would he do that? Because he thinks they support him. I flipped through the pages. At first glance, they did. He sounded concerned, measured, caring. But then Lisa pointed something out. "Read it again," she said, slowly. Why would he do that? Because he thinks they support him. I flipped through the pages. At first glance, they did. He sounded concerned, measured, caring. But then Lisa pointed something out. "Read it again," she said, slowly. So I did, line by line. And suddenly, I saw it. The wording, the subtle suggestions, the way he framed questions. Not what happened, but you felt hurt when your mom did that, right? Not tell me how you feel, but I know she's been confusing for you. He wasn't asking. He was guiding, leading, planting. And the more I read, the clearer it became. It wasn't obvious. Not to someone listening casually. But in a courtroom, where every word mattered, it was everything. "This is manipulation," Lisa said quietly. I nodded. Because now I could see it too. Not just feel it, see it, understand it, prove it. That night, I sat alone in my living room. The transcripts spread across the coffee table, and for the first time, I cried. Not out of sadness, not out of anger, but out of recognition. Because I finally understood something I had been struggling with for years. I hadn't been losing my mind. I had been losing control of my narrative, and someone else had been writing it, until now. A few days before the trial, something unexpected happened. Emily showed up, again. But this time, she wasn't hesitant. She walked in like she had something to say. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course," I said. We sat down together, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me. I asked Dad something she said. My heart skipped. "What did you ask him?" I asked him why he always tells me how I feel instead of asking. I felt a chill run through me. "And what did he say?" She hesitated. Then, "He said he was just trying to help me understand my emotions." I nodded slowly. "That sounds like him." She studied my face. "Is that wrong?" I leaned forward slightly. "It depends," I said. "On what? On whether he's helping you understand or telling you what to believe?" She didn't respond immediately, but I could see it. That internal shift again. That realization starting to take shape. "I don't think I like how it feels," she admitted. That broke my heart, but it also gave me hope. "Then trust that," I said gently. "Your feelings are yours. No one gets to define them for you." She nodded, then asked something that caught me off guard. "Why didn't you fight back sooner?" I swallowed, because that question was the hardest one. "I didn't see it clearly," I said, and when I started to, I paused. I didn't trust myself enough to say it out loud. Emily looked down. "I think I'm starting to see it now," she whispered. That moment meant more than any legal victory ever could. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about being seen, being understood, and finally, being heard. The day before the trial, Daniel called me. His voice sounded different, quieter. "Mom, I need to ask you something." "Okay, if what you're saying is true." He hesitated. Then why didn't I notice I closed my eyes briefly? Because I knew this question. I had asked it myself so many times. Because it wasn't obvious, I said. It wasn't supposed to be. Silence. Then, "I feel stupid." "No," I said firmly. "You were trusting. That's not the same thing." "It is," I replied, "and it's not something to be ashamed of." He didn't argue, but I could hear the weight in his voice. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "That's okay," I said. "You don't have to decide right now." Another pause. "Then will the court show everything?" "Yes." "All of it, yes." He exhaled slowly. "Then it'll be there." When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Because tomorrow, everything would change. Not just legally, emotionally, permanently. There would be no more hiding, no more partial truths, no more carefully controlled narratives. Just everything. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of that. Because the truth was finally strong enough to stand on its own. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. Everything felt stripped. Neutral walls, hard benches, people speaking in controlled voices as if emotions had no place here. But they did. They just weren't allowed to show. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Lisa leaned in slightly. "Just breathe," she whispered. I nodded, but my eyes were already searching, looking for them. Emily, Daniel. And then I saw them, sitting behind Richard, not beside him, behind him. That detail mattered more than anyone else in that room would understand. Because for the first time, they weren't aligned with him. They were just present, watching, waiting, listening, just like me. Richard walked in a moment later, confident, calm, like a man who believed he still controlled the narrative. Our eyes met briefly. He didn't look away, but neither did I. Not this time. The judge entered. Everyone stood. And just like that, it began. Opening statements were exactly what I expected. Richard's attorney went first, smooth, controlled, convincing. "She has built a narrative rooted in personal dissatisfaction," he said, reframing normal parental guidance as manipulation. I felt the words hit the room. Not me, the room, because that's what they were meant to do. Shape perception, set the tone. "She is attempting to rewrite the past," he continued, "and in doing so, she risks damaging the very relationships she claims to protect." Then Lisa stood, and everything shifted. "We are not here to rewrite the past," she said calmly. "We are here to examine it closely." She paused, letting that land. "Because when you look closely enough, patterns emerge." She turned slightly. "And patterns don't lie." I felt something steady inside me. Not confidence, not yet, but something close. The first witnesses were procedural, background, establishing context. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, but necessary. Then, it was time. Lisa called me to the stand. My heart pounded as I stood, walked, sat, swore to tell the truth. And suddenly, every word I said mattered. Lisa approached gently. Martha, she said, her tone calm and steady. Can you describe your relationship with your children before the separation? I took a breath. It was close, I said. Very close. And after? I swallowed. Confusing. How so? I glanced briefly toward Emily and Daniel, then back at Lisa. They started saying things that didn't sound like them. Can you give an example? Yes. I steadied myself. They would tell me I was overreacting to things that hurt me. Lisa nodded. And had they used that language before? No. Did you ever tell them they should feel that way? No. She paused, then asked the question that mattered. When did you begin to notice a pattern? I didn't hesitate. When their father started speaking for them instead of to them. There was a shift in the room. Subtle, but real. Lisa stepped back slightly. Thank you. Then came the cross-examination. Richard's attorney approached. Sharp. Focused. Martha, he began. Isn't it true that you and your husband had disagreements during your marriage? Yes. And isn't it possible that your interpretation of events is influenced by those disagreements? No. He raised an eyebrow. No. No, I repeated, because I'm not talking about disagreements. I'm talking about patterns. He smiled slightly. As you see them, as they happened. He tried to push further, to shake me, to create doubt. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't defending myself anymore. I was describing reality, and that made all the difference. After I stepped down, I felt drained, but not broken. Not this time. Then Lisa called the next witness, the psychological evaluator. The same woman who had spent hours asking me questions. Now, she sat on the stand, neutral, professional, unbiased. Lisa approached. Can you state your findings regarding Martha Sanders? Yes, she said clearly. Based on my evaluation, there is no evidence of psychological instability, delusion, or impaired judgment. The words echoed. Clear, direct, unavoidable. And in your professional opinion, Lisa continued, does her account show signs of fabrication? No. Does it align with patterns consistent with external influence? Direct, unavoidable. And in your professional opinion, Lisa continued, does her account show signs of fabrication? No. Does it align with patterns consistent with external influence? The evaluator paused briefly. Yes. A ripple moved through the room, small but undeniable. Then came the transcripts. Lisa introduced them carefully, walked the court through them line by line, not rushing, not dramatizing, just revealing. Can you read this section aloud? She asked the evaluator. The woman nodded. You felt hurt when your mom did that, right? Lisa turned to the judge. Notice the phrasing, she said. It's just not a question seeking information. She looked at the evaluator. What is that? A leading statement, the evaluator replied, and repeated patterns of this can influence perception, she said, especially in emotionally dependent relationships. I didn't look at Richard. I didn't need to, because I could feel it. The shift. The slow unraveling of everything he had built. Then, the moment I had been both waiting for and fearing. Lee had been both waiting for and fearing. Lisa called Emily. My breath caught as she walked to the stand. She looked nervous, but determined. She sat, swore in, and then Lisa spoke gently. Emily, do you feel comfort able answering questions today? Yes, sir, called Emily. My breath caught as she walked to the stand. She looked nervous, but determined. She sat, swore in, and then Lisa spoke gently. Emily, do you feel comfortable answering questions today? Yes, she said quietly. Can you describe your relationship with your mother? Emily glanced at me. Just for a second. Then, it was really close. My throat tightened. And did that change? Yes, when Emily hesitated. Then, after my dad started explaining things to me. Lisa nodded. And how did he explain them? Emily looked down, then spoke slowly. He would tell me what things meant before I could decide for myself. Silence. Heavy. Powerful. And how did that make you feel? Lisa asked. Emily swallowed. Confused? She paused. Like my feelings weren't really mine anymore. I couldn't breathe for a second, because hearing it, from her, changed everything. Lisa stepped back. No further questions. The courtroom felt different now. Not colder, not neutral, but awake. Because the truth was no longer just mine. It was theirs too. After Emily stepped down, the room didn't feel the same anymore. Something had shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, but undeniably. Truth had weight, and now it was sitting in that courtroom impossible to ignore. But it wasn't over, not even close, because then Richard's attorney stood. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "we would like to call Richard Sanders to the stand." My stomach tightened. This was it, the moment where he would try to take everything back, control the story again, rewrite what had just been said. Richard walked to the stand like he had done this 100 times before. Calm, composed, confident. He sat down, swore in, and then looked straight ahead. Not at me, not at the kids, just forward, like the rest of us didn't exist. His attorney approached. "Richard," he began, "can you describe your role as a father?" Richard nodded slightly. "I've always been very involved," he said. "Emotionally, mentally. I've always tried to guide my children." Guide, that word again. And after the separation, I became more attentive, he said, because I saw that they were struggling. With what? With confusion, he replied. Emotional instability. I felt my jaw tighten, but I stayed still. That confusion, the attorney continued. Where did you believe it came from? Richard paused. Just long enough. Then, from inconsistent behavior, he said. From their mother. The words hung in the air, sharp, deliberate, planned. And how did you respond to that? I tried to help them understand what they were experiencing, he said. To give them clarity. Clarity. That word almost made me laugh, but I didn't, because I knew what was coming next. The performance, the careful positioning, the subtle victim narrative. I never told them what to think, Richard continued. I simply helped them process their emotions. Lisa stood. Objection, she said, leading and contradicting documented evidence. The judge nodded slightly. Sustained. Richard didn't react, but I saw it. The flicker, the smallest crack in his control. Then it was Lisa's turn. She approached slowly. No rush, no aggression, just precision. Richard, she said calmly, you stated that you helped your children process their emotions. Is that correct? Yes. Let's look at this transcript. She held up a document. Line 42. Can you read that aloud? Richard took the paper. His eyes moved across the page. Then he read, You felt hurt when your mom did that, right? Lisa nodded. Is that a question? Yes. Is it open-ended? He hesitated. It's guiding. Lisa tilted her head slightly. Guiding or suggesting silence. A suggestion, he admitted. Lisa didn't smile, didn't react. She just moved forward. And how many times would you say you used this type of phrasing, I don't know? Would you agree it appears frequently in your conversations? I was trying to help them articulate their feelings. That wasn't my question, Lisa said gently. Another pause. Yes, he said finally, frequently. Lisa took a step closer. And would you agree that repeatedly suggesting emotions can influence how those emotions are perceived? Richard shifted slightly. I suppose it could. Not could. And would you agree that repeatedly suggesting emotions can influence how those emotions are perceived? Richard shifted slightly. I suppose it could. Not could, Lisa said, softly. In your case, did it silence? Longer this time. The kind that stretches. The kind that exposes. I didn't intend for it to, he said. Lisa nodded. I'm not asking about your intention. That landed. Hard. I'm asking about the effect. Richard's jaw tightened slightly. I don't believe it changed anything. Lisa turned, looked toward Emily, then back at Richard. Your daughter testified that she felt her emotions were no longer her own. The room went still. Do you disagree with her? Richard didn't answer immediately. And that hesitation said everything. I think she was confused, he said. Finally, Lisa nodded slowly. Confused or influenced? He stopped, because there was no safe answer, and for the first time, Richard looked uncertain. Lisa stepped back. No further questions, but the damage was done. Not loud, not explosive, but precise, like a crack spreading through glass. Then came Daniel. He was the last witness, and somehow the most important. He walked to the stand slower than Emily had, more hesitant than more conflicted. He sat down, swore in, and then looked at me. Not briefly, not accidentally, but directly. I held his gaze, not pushing, not pleading, just present. Lisa approached. Daniel, she said gently, how would you describe your relationship with your mother before the separation? He took a breath. It was good, he said. Really good. And after? He swallowed. I thought it changed. Thought. He nodded slowly. Yes. What made you think that? Daniel hesitated. Then, things I was told. Lisa didn't interrupt, didn't guide. She just let him continue. My dad would explain situations, he said. Tell me what things meant. And did you question that at the time? No. Why not? Because I trusted him. That word hit harder than anything else. And now? Lisa asked. Daniel looked down briefly, then back up. I think I stopped trusting myself instead. The room went silent again, because that was the truth no one could argue with. Can you explain that? Lisa asked softly. Daniel nodded. I started feeling things he said, but then I would hear something different and assume I was wrong. He paused, and after a while, I didn't know which thoughts were mine anymore. I felt tears rise, but I didn't let them fall. Not here, not now. Lisa stepped back. Thank you. No cross-examination could undo that, because it wasn't accusation. It wasn't interpretation. It was realization, and realization can't be argued away. As Daniel stepped down, he glanced at me again. And this time, there was no distance, no confusion, just something rebuilding, slowly, carefully, but real. The judge called for a short recess, and as everyone stood, I realized something. This wasn't just about proving Richard wrong anymore. It was about giving my children something back. Their own voices, their own thoughts,
their own truth. And for the first time, I could see that happening right in front of me. When the court reconvened, everything felt quieter, not calmer, just heavier, like everyone understood that something irreversible had already happened. The truth had been spoken. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to change things. Now it was time for closing arguments. Now it was time for closing arguments, and I could feel it in my chest. This was the final stretch. Richard's attorney stood first. He adjusted his jacket, stepped forward, and faced the judge. Your Honor, and I could feel it in my chest. This was the final stretch. Richard's attorney stood first. He adjusted his jacket, stepped forward, and faced the judge. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady, practiced. What we have witnessed here is not evidence of manipulation, but a family navigating emotional difficulty. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. The reframing, the softening, the attempt to make everything seem normal. Parents guide their children, he continued. They help them process complex feelings. That is not control. That is responsibility. He walked slowly as he spoke. Measured, deliberate. We must be careful not to punish a father for being present, he added, for being involved, for caring. I opened my eyes again because I knew what he was doing, turning involvement into innocence, turning influence into love. The testimony we heard today reflects confusion, he said. Not coercion, misinterpretation, not manipulation. He paused. Let the silence stretch. And we must not allow one perspective, however sincere, to redefine an entire family dynamic. Then he stepped back, like he had just restored balance, like he had undone everything. But he hadn't, because Lisa stood next, and the room shifted again. Not loudly, but clearly. She didn't move right away, just stood there for a moment, looking at the judge, then at the court, then at Emily and Daniel. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't land. When she spoke, her voice wasn't louder. It was quieter, but sharper. Your Honor, she began, this case is not about whether parents guide their children. She paused. It's about how. That line cut through everything. We have heard the word guidance, outer. It was quieter, but sharper. Your Honor, she began, this case is not about whether parents guide their children. She paused. It's about how. That line cut through everything. We have heard the word guidance repeated, she continued. But guidance invites understanding. She took a step forward. It does not replace it. I felt my breath slow, because every word she said was something I had felt for years, but never been able to explain. We are not asking this court to punish involvement. I felt my breath slow, because every word she said was something I had felt for years, but never been able to explain. We are not asking this court to punish involvement, Lisa said. We are asking it to recognize influence. She picked up a document. The transcripts show repeated patterns of leading language. Another step. The evaluator confirmed the psychological impact of those patterns. Another. And most importantly, she turned toward the witness stand. Both children described losing trust in their own emotions. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of truth, full of recognition, full of something no argument could erase. This is not confusion, Lisa said softly. This is displacement. She let that word settle. Then she delivered the final blow. Because when a child no longer trusts their own feelings, she paused. They begin to trust someone else's instead. I felt something break inside me,
Not in a painful way.
but in a releasing way, like something I had been holding for years. Finally, let go. Lisa stepped back. No further statements. And just like that, it was over. The judge didn't speak immediately. He reviewed notes, looked at the documents, took his time. Every second stretched. Every breath felt too loud. Then he looked up.
This court recognizes the complexity of familial relationships. He began.
Formal, measured, careful. But his tone had changed. However, he continued, it is the responsibility of this court to evaluate not just intention, but impact. My heart started pounding again, harder, faster. The testimony presented demonstrates a consistent pattern of suggestive communication. He glanced down briefly, then back up. And that pattern has had a measurable effect on the children's perception of their own emotional experiences. I felt my hands tremble, just slightly. This court finds that such influence, whether intentional or not, he paused, is not in the best interest of the children. A tear slipped down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I didn't need to, because I wasn't hiding anymore. The court orders that primary custody remain with Martha Sanders. He continued. My breath caught. Furthermore, all communication involving emotional interpretation shall be monitored within structured family counseling sessions. Richard shifted beside his attorney. For the first time, he looked small. Not defeated, but no longer in control. This is not a punitive ruling, the judge added. It is corrective. He looked toward Emily and Daniel. And it is intended to restore independent and emotional development. Then, he struck the gavel, and it was done. Just like that, years of confusion, months of fear, all resolved, in a single moment. But it didn't feel like an ending, not really, because when I turned and looked at my children, I realized something. This was only the beginning. Emily stood slowly, Daniel beside her. They didn't rush toward me, didn't collapse into my arms, and that was okay, because what they gave me instead was something better. Emily stepped closer, her voice quiet. Mom, just that word, nothing more. But it was enough. Daniel followed. I think I understand now, he said. I nodded, not pushing, not overwhelming them, just present, like I had always been. And for the first time in a long time, they saw it. Not through someone else's words, but through their own. And that was everything. The courthouse emptied faster than I expected. People always imagine moments like that, the final ruling, the gavel, the victory, as something grand. But the truth is, it ends quietly. No music, no applause, just people gathering their things and leaving. I stood there for a second longer than I needed to, not because I didn't want to move, but because I didn't trust my legs to carry the weight of what had just happened. Martha. Lisa's voice pulled me back. I turned to her. Thank you, I said. It felt too small, too simple, for everything she had done. She smiled gently. You did the hard part, she said. You told the truth, and you stayed steady. I nodded. But inside, I knew it wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. It was about them.
Emily and Daniel. I turned slowly. They were standing near the hallway. Not rushing, not avoiding me, just waiting. That was new. That alone was enough to make my chest tighten. I walked toward them, each step careful, not because I was afraid of rejection anymore, but because I understood something now. Rebuilding doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, careful moments. "Hey," I said softly. Emily looked at me. Her eyes were still guarded, but not closed. Not like before. "Hey," she replied. Daniel shifted slightly beside her. "I didn't know it would be like that," he said. "Like what I asked?" He hesitated. Everything he said finally. Hearing it all out loud, it felt different. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Truth usually does." Emily exhaled slowly. I thought I was so sure she admitted. About everything. Her voice cracked slightly. And now I don't even know what I felt before was real. I stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. "What you felt was real," I said gently. "Even if someone tried to reshape it, it still came from you." She looked at me carefully, like she was testing the words. Daniel spoke next. "I think I made it worse," he said. I shook my head immediately. "No," I said. "You trusted someone you were supposed to trust." He looked down. "But I stopped trusting you." That one landed deeper than anything else. "But I didn't let it show. Not in a way that would make him carry that weight." "I know," I said softly. "And I never stopped being here." He nodded slowly, like he was finally starting to understand that. We stood there for a moment. No pressure, no expectations, just space. Then Emily stepped forward, and this time, she hugged me. Not tightly, not desperately, but intentionally. And that mattered more. I closed my eyes, letting myself feel it, not forcing anything, just accepting what was being offered. When she pulled back, Daniel followed. Awkward at first, but real. And for the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't reaching for them. They were coming to me. We walked out of the courthouse together, not as a perfect family, not as something fully healed, but as something possible. And that was enough. The next few weeks weren't easy. People always think the hard part ends after the court decision. It doesn't. It just changes shape. Emily started therapy. Daniel too. Not because the court ordered it, but because they wanted to understand themselves again. And I joined some sessions when they asked me to. Not to defend myself. They asked me to. Not to defend myself. Not to explain everything. But to listen. Really listen. The first session was the hardest. The therapist asked a simple question. What does trust mean to each of you? Not to explain everything, but to listen. Really listen. The first session was the hardest. The therapist asked a simple question. What does trust mean to each of you? Emily answered first. It means not feeling like I'm being told what I should feel. Daniel nodded. And not being corrected every time I feel something different. Then they both looked at me. I took a breath. It means giving you space to be wrong sometimes, I said. Because figuring things out on your own is how you learn who you are. The therapist smiled slightly. But the kids didn't. Not yet, because trust doesn't come back in words. It comes back in patterns, in consistency, in time, and I was willing to give all of that. Richard tried to reach out a few times. Messages, emails, even a letter. He said he wanted to fix things, but for the first time, I didn't feel the need to respond immediately. Because fixing things wasn't about him anymore. It was about the kids and what they needed, not what he wanted. Eventually, supervised sessions were arranged, structured, guided, careful, and I could see it even then. The shift in power. Not in a cruel way, not in a punishing way, but in a balanced way. Where voices were equal, where no one voice could override the others. One afternoon, after a session, Daniel sat next to me in the car. Quiet. Then I asked Dad something today, he said. What I asked him why he said. What I asked him why he always told me what I was feeling. I glanced at him. And what did he say? Daniel stared ahead. He said he thought he was helping. I nodded slowly. That sounds like him? Daniel exhaled. I told him it didn't feel like help. He always told me what I was feeling. I glanced at him. And what did he say? Daniel stared ahead. He said he thought he was helping. I nodded slowly. That sounds like him. Daniel exhaled. I told him it didn't feel like help. That sentence, that simple, honest sentence, was something he would have never said before. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't just about undoing damage. It was about building something stronger in its place. Emily started opening up more too. Not all at once, but little by little. She would ask questions about the past, about moments she remembered differently, and I answered honestly. Not perfectly, not defensively, just honestly. Because now, truth wasn't something I was afraid of. It was something I trusted. One evening, months later, we were sitting at the dinner table. Just the three of us. No tension, no heaviness. Just normal. Emily laughed at something Daniel said, and for a second, I froze. Because I hadn't heard that sound in so long. Not real laughter. Not free. And it hit me then. We weren't just recovering. We were living again. Later that night, as I stood in the kitchen alone, I realized something else. I hadn't won. Not in the way people think. There was no victory over Richard. No moment of triumph. What I gained was something much more important. I got my children back. Not as they were before, but as who they were becoming. And this time, they were choosing it. Choosing me. Choosing themselves. Choosing truth. And that was more than enough. After everything that happened, I kept asking myself one question. How easy is it for truth to be replaced, not destroyed, not erased, just slowly rewritten? And the answer scared me. Because it doesn't take something dramatic. It doesn't take shouting or obvious lies. Sometimes, all it takes is consistency, a calm voice, and someone you trust. That's what I learned from all of this. That truth isn't just about facts. It's about perception. And if you don't protect your own voice, someone else will define it for you. For years, I thought I was losing myself. That maybe I was too emotional, too reactive, too difficult. But I wasn't. I was just being reshaped. And the moment I stopped questioning myself, everything changed. Not instantly, not perfectly, but permanently. So, if you're watching this right now, and something in your life feels off, if conversations leave you doubting your own memory, if you feel like your emotions are being corrected more than understood, please don't ignore that. Pause. Listen to yourself. Because your feelings are data. They matter, and they belong to you, no one else. Not even the people you love, and especially not the ones who try to define them for you. Healing didn't come from winning in court. It came from reclaiming my voice and giving my children the space to find theirs again. That's what saved us. Not perfection, not revenge. Truth. Raw, uncomfortable, unavoidable truth. If you've ever been in a situation like this, I really want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like someone was slowly changing how others saw you, or even worse, how you saw yourself? Leave a comment and share your story. You're not alone in this, and your voice deserves to be heard. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Because stories like this matter. They help people recognize things they couldn't put into words before. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always read your comments, and I truly appreciate every single one. Stay strong, stay aware, and most importantly, stay true to yourself.